Hello, I am Amfortas, and today I ask, is feminism a hate movement? I'm indebted to my colleague and fine men's rights advocate Fiedelbogen for the fine words that he has asked me to speak. I'm honoured. To remove man-hating from feminism would be to extract the DNA nucleus from a living cell, the fuel rod from a reactor, the teeth from a Rottweiler. My friend Fiedelbogen asserts that man-hating, misandry, is feminism's moral centre of gravity, and that without man-hating or at least some degree of disaffection towards males, feminism could not logically continue to exist. It would flounder without purpose and disintegrate. If you give the matter a little thought, and he and I both have given it a lot, you will see that no other theory so elegantly accounts for the observable facts of the case. Of course, there are women, feminists, who will say that feminism is about equality. Sure, National Socialism was about building autobahns and making Volkswagens. Let's start with some basics. Would anyone dispute that feminism is a socio-political movement on behalf of women? Would anyone dispute that feminism proffers a particular analysis of man-woman relations? Would anyone dispute that feminist analysis holds women to be globally disadvantaged by some objective and quantifiable standard of measurement in comparison with men? Finally, would anyone dispute that feminist analysis concludes an element of male authorship in the comparative disadvantagement of women? Yes, feminism is a women's advocacy movement which identifies men as the wellspring of certain difficulties said to afflict women. This would both summarise and make reply to those questions, even though most of those difficulties are bogus. And given that men are said to be the wellspring of women's difficulties, are we to believe that no opinion about men as men ever infiltrates feminist thinking on any level? Does any self-admitted feminist, having once identified men as the source of women's troubles, go serenely about her business harbouring no strictly personal opinion about men? I'd call it a considerable stretch to believe any such thing. Admittedly, we fashion the argument upon probabilities, but they are compelling probabilities. I seriously doubt that any better can be offered. I'll have no truck with the "I blame patriarchy" cop-out. This is simply a way of postponing the issue by obfuscating it. Since the phrase is so fuzzy, it is useless for normal purposes, although useful indeed for underhanded purposes. But patriarchy is plainly understood as a uniquely male institution. Men created it, and men keep it going, or so the story goes, to oppress women. Do not ask yourself, all you dear women out there, about affirmative action, or the dispossession of fathers and the taking of their children in our divorce courts, of the massive funding to women's health and next to nothing for men's health, of men dying 7 years earlier than women and waiting longer for retirement. It's a very odd patriarchy that disadvantages women with such largesse and advantages men with such punishments. Despite that, it is mighty difficult to understand how a person could blame a mythical patriarchy without blaming men in the very same swoop. Let us inquire further into probabilities. Feminism identifies men as the source of women's difficulties. So ask yourself, what class of women might be drawn to such a social movement in disproportionate numbers? Would such a movement attract women who get along well with men and enjoy their company? All right, possibly a few, just possibly. But would such women compose the bulk of the membership? Where do you suppose the probability lies in such a case? Would such a movement attract women who do not personally see men as a source of difficulty in their lives? Is this probable? Is this plausible? Is this credible? Does it fit? Hate is a very strong word, and it signifies a strong modus. It is hard to imagine just how powerful hate can be. Do you think you can imagine it? Well, the chances are that you are nowhere near and have no idea. It can get even worse, far worse than you can imagine. Men don't have to imagine it, we experience it. It is all on a spectrum, on a continuum. Hate can be bad, and it can always get badder. Even to the point where the hater implodes into a black hole and pops clean out of the moral universe and sucks as much as possible along for the ride. All right, maybe the word hate is not the wine for all occasions. I like the word disaffection. It is more inclusive than hate because it embraces all shades of disliking without privileging the extreme. Now, a social movement such as feminism needn't hope to exclude the element of disaffection. I've explained the reason for this already, but now we must proceed to the next stage of examination. If the disaffection spectrum begins with mild disenchantment and progresses by shades clear up to unmitigated loathing, and if feminism incorporates at least some of this spectrum, then we should pause to wonder exactly how much of the spectrum is thus incorporated, and precisely how far it reaches in the direction of uncompounded malevolence. How high on the hate scale does feminism's emotional aura actually extend? Where does it stop? Again, consider the likelihoods. If the feminist disaffection spectrum reaches no higher than a mild and possibly sporadic disenchantment, an occasional mood as it were, then feminism would be very plainly lack the sustaining force to be a viable women's advocacy movement. There is simply no way it would gather the necessary motivation and momentum. There would be neither snow for a snowball, nor any appreciable hill to roll it down. No accretion of mass, no accumulation of velocity. In a word, feminism would be a non-starter. A thing like feminism requires a mighty fund of passion, both to launch itself and to keep itself running. Tepid feeling will not suffice. It needs to be robust and vehement, and it needs to gain validation through a bogus and mendacious political analysis that will both justify the original feeling and contribute to the growth of that feeling by the use of a self-fulfilling feedback loop. The world has always contained a number of people, sociopathic or what have you, who for various reasons don't like the opposite sex. The word misogynist is bandied about and misused in common parlance. When an ideology like feminism appeared, proffering a political analysis of sexual relations, casting men in the role of miscreants, it is easy to foretell the response man-hating women will make to this. Clearly there will be some exceptions, but I feel confident most such women will be on it like bees on a honeycomb, or flies on a turd if you prefer. There is nothing quite like finding an analysis to uphold your attitude, and the documentary record indeed bears out that early second-wave feminists in the radical 1960s and 70s were a vehement, passionate lot. They were not wishy-washy, they were not tepid, they were not mildly disenchanted with men. Just look at the Antipodean pedophile Greer, the Harridan Marxist Dworkin, the inventive liar Koss, the perverter of justice McKinnon, the manipulative publicist Steinem. These are the great gas planets orbiting around feminism's black hole, with many lesser but rocky planetoids circling beyond. They were by no stretch of the imagination living on the low end of the dissatisfaction spectrum. More significantly, they were not merely attracted to something which somebody else had created. No, they were present at the very inception. They themselves were the creators and early architects of the movement. Without them, or people like them, the movement would never have started moving in the first place. Nor would the movement be moving still today if people like them were not down in the engine room stoking the boiler, or up in the pilot house turning the wheel and watching the binnacle. They are the dynamos, the generators, and if we should replace them with a crew that was just a shade less disaffected, the new dynamo would be a shade less dynamic, as would the entire movement. It would be just a shade less inclined to bulldoze over reality and truth obstacles, a shade more inclined to call it a day earlier in the day, a shade more inclined to lower the bar of compromise over all. Dial down this shade by shade and watch the movement grow more and more anemic. Eventually, feminism would be wavering in its convictions, sleeping late, and frittering away its dwindling energy on matters increasingly peripheral and unfocused. In other words, feminism would become a non-entity and a non-movement. So we have shown that feminism offers an ideological interpretation of female disadvantage in life. We have alluded to the feminist belief that female disadvantage originates from a male-driven power conspiracy, and asserted that such a belief is not feasible to uphold, absent of a purgative evaluation of men, both individually and as a group. From this, we have concluded that some varying degrees of personal disaffection towards men cannot be absent from the minds of most feminists, and therefore cannot be absent from the feminist movement as a whole. Finally, we have made the case that feminism's viability as an advocacy movement is directly indexed to the degree of disaffection towards men found amongst the movement's membership, with greater viability correlated to greater dissatisfaction. Or, as stated in this early part of the article, man-hating is feminism's moral centre of gravity. Without man-hating, or at least some degree of disaffection with males, feminism could not logically continue to exist. Milder forms of feminism do indeed exist, and so do milder feminists, but they are not the vanguard, they are not the cutting edge, they are not the powerhouse. However, they work diligently to secure advantages for women, like scavengers in the aftermath of the main assault, once the enemy has been routed. They are petty clerks, the bureaucrats, the carpetbaggers, the rent-seeking scum, the contractors who move into the occupied territory and secure the administration of it. It is part of their job to seem unthreatening, which is easy when somebody else does the dirty work. Their distinguishing feature is that of taking for granted what has been ideologically instilled into the general culture, and taking their ease against the immoral support cushion this affords them. Left entirely to themselves, they would have neither the ambition to initiate a political movement, nor the drive to keep it operating in a political capacity. Yet they have an immoral investment in feminism's worldview, which proposes male guilt as an explanatory model, and by this investiture they plant themselves within feminism's web of misandric operations. It is easy to see that if man-hating disappeared from the world, feminism would neither serve any purpose nor have any means to continue operating. But feminism is still operating, and if you are male, you are not amiss to suspect that feminism means to harm you. So under the circumstances, you don't owe feminism any favours, nor do you owe women any favours under the immoral banner of feminism. Yes, I call feminism a hate movement. Whosoever desires may undertake to convince me that feminism is a love movement, empathetic and caring. Fat chance. This has been Amfortas, bringing clarity from the pen of Fiedelbogen. This podcast has been produced by Christian J. for All for One Productions. I dedicate it to my estranged and beloved daughter and my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased. Ask, who does the Grail serve?